few years ago, a group of close friends and I went on a camping trip that we had meticulously planned for over a year. The idea was to escape the chaos of city life and immerse ourselves in the serene beauty of nature. There were 5 of us: myself, Rachel, a 23-year-old woman, along with Rob, Jenna, Jay, and Dave. Having spent all of high school together, we were a tight-knit group, and for me, this trip felt like it was destined to be the highlight of the year. I couldn't have been more wrong. Our backpacks were heavy with supplies, but our spirits were light as we set off from the trailhead. The weather was perfect, and we made steady progress. The trail meandered through the forest, starting with gentle inclines that eventually dipped into shallow ravines before ascending again. We were full of laughter and good energy, savoring the simplicity of being away from screens, schedules, and the daily grind, eagerly anticipating the campfire waiting for us at day's end. By late afternoon, we had covered quite a distance. Since it wasn't yet time to set up camp, we decided to take a break in a serene clearing nestled by a small hill. It felt secluded, even comforting. We dropped our packs, spread out on the ground, and pulled out sandwiches and water bottles. The forest surrounded us in a hushed calm, interrupted only by the faint rustle of leaves or an occasional bird call. The stillness made me feel like we were standing in a moment that mattered, a fleeting breath of peace. I was right about its significance, but not in the way I expected. After a few minutes, Dave stood up with a casual comment about needing to relieve himself and wandered toward a cluster of trees. None of us thought much of it. We were too busy eating and stretching out our aching limbs. But then it happened. The tranquility shattered with a sound so raw and piercing, it felt as though it physically ripped through us. It was a scream, primal and filled with an unimaginable agony. Every instinct in my body screamed danger as we leapt to our feet and ran toward the source of the noise. Crashing through the underbrush, branches snagging on our clothes, we found Dave just 30 yards away, crumpled on the ground, clawing frantically at his leg. A long-abandoned bear trap had clamped its rusted jaws around his ankle. Dave's initial howls had turned into guttural moans. His face was ashen and slick with sweat as he writhed on the ground in sheer torment. Blood pooled around his leg, soaking into the forest floor, and the sight of jagged metal digging into torn flesh made my stomach twist violently. Jenna dropped to her knees beside him, frozen in shock as she murmured, "Oh God." "Oh God," hands trembling uselessly just above his injury as if afraid to make it worse. Rob swore under his breath and paced back and forth in tight circles, helpless. Jay stood rooted to the spot, staring blankly at the horrific scene before us. And then there was me. I forced my eyes to focus on this awful contraption. The trap appeared ancient, its metal edges dulled by rust but no less menacing, and its chain was tethered to a deeply buried stake that must have sat there for decades until Dave's bad luck triggered it, finally snapping out of his trance. Jay dropped to his knees next to Jenna. "I've seen traps like this before," he said desperately, his voice uneven. "There's supposed to be a release mechanism. Somewhere." His fingers trembled as he searched along the edges of the cruel device, while Dave whimpered between sharp, shallow breaths that sent shivers through all of us. His blood coated Jay's hands as he worked furiously against time. After what felt like an eternity stretched thin by tension and dread, Jay finally found it, a corroded lever buried beneath years of dirt. "Hold him steady," Jay instructed grimly. Rob and I immediately moved to pin Dave down. He was flailing involuntarily from the pain. Jenna gripped his hand tightly, murmuring reassurances we knew he probably couldn't hear. With both hands and all the strength he could muster, Jay pressed down on the lever. For an agonizing moment, nothing happened. And then, mercifully, the trap's jaws snapped open. Dave screamed once more as the pressure released from his mangled leg. He was free, but grievously injured. The sight that greeted us was haunting. Flesh ripped wide open to reveal bone beneath shredded tissue. Blood poured freely from the wound despite our efforts to stanch it. We carried him back to the clearing as carefully as we could, while he bit back cries of agony that faded into pitiful whimpers. Jenna rummaged frantically through her bag until Dave was in dire need of a hospital, and we were at least a full day's hike away from the car. Time wasn't on our side, so we decided to leave most of our gear behind and only take what we absolutely needed to move quickly. Jay and I supported Dave, his arms draped heavily over our shoulders, while Jenna carried the first aid kit. Rob took the lead, still gripping his gun tightly. as if it could ward off the horrors we'd encountered. The trail we had so happily walked just days ago now felt alien. What once seemed like a peaceful sanctuary was now transformed into a twisted maze of terror. Fueled by adrenaline, we initially covered good ground, but it soon became clear Dave was deteriorating fast. His face was ghostly pale, his head lolling against my shoulder as he weakly pleaded for us to slow down. Blood soaked through the bandages we had hastily wrapped around his leg, dripping onto the trail in a steady, ominous line. Every step brought him pain, but stopping wasn't an option. We pushed forward, knowing that every second counted, and just when the situation felt impossibly grim, it got worse. We were maybe halfway back to the car when a sharp crack split the air. Something whizzed past me with terrifying speed, close enough that I felt its air kiss my skin. A gunshot, and we knew immediately it wasn't Rob's. Chaos erupted. Someone yelled as we dove for cover, pulling Dave behind a fallen log. The sharp report of another shot followed almost instantly, splintering bark just above us. Rob returned fire, shooting blindly in the direction of the threat as he shouted for us to run. "Go!" he barked, motioning frantically as he continued to fire his pistol. Without hesitation, Jay and I lifted Dave again and began stumbling forward, with Jenna close on our heels. The woods descended into chaos. Gunshots echoed all around us, some close enough to make me flinch, others farther out but just as menacing. It was impossible to pinpoint where they were coming from. The echoes ricocheted off the trees like malevolent whispers. We barreled through the undergrowth, branches slapping at our faces and roots threatening to trip us with every step. Despite everything, Dave kept moving, sheer adrenaline propelling him forward as if he were running on borrowed time. Somehow, Rob caught up to us, panting harshly as he reloaded his weapon on the run. "Keep moving," he gasped. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead weights, but we had no choice. Fear was an unforgiving fuel that drove us onward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the forest began to thin. I saw it, the faint outline of our car through the trees, and desperation gave my legs one last surge of strength. Then came one final gunshot behind us. Just as suddenly there was silence. We didn't stop to investigate. We didn't dare look back. Scrambling toward the car, we practically threw Dave into the back seat. Blood smeared across the upholstery as Jenna climbed in beside him, desperately pressing fresh bandages against his wound. Jay jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine, while Rob scanned the tree line with his pistol still raised, ready for anything or anyone. The car screeched away from the trailhead as fast as Jay could manage without losing control on the twisting forest road. Cell phone signal was non-existent out there, so we aimed for the nearest town some 30 miles away. That drive passed in a blur of panic and silent prayers. We kept talking to Dave in an effort to keep him awake. His responses were slurred but mostly coherent, enough to keep hope alive. Still, a small voice in my mind couldn't help whispering that he might not make it. We arrived at the hospital just after nightfall, tires squealing as we pulled up to the emergency room entrance. Medical staff swarmed us immediately, whisking Dave away on a stretcher, before any of us could say much more than a frantic explanation of what had happened. The four of us collapsed into plastic chairs in the waiting room, shivering and shaken, our clothing stiff with dried blood and caked with dirt. An hour later, a doctor appeared and delivered news that hit us like a tidal wave. Dave wasn't going to die. Relief surged through us like electricity at those words, but there was bad news too. His leg was in bad shape and would require surgery, maybe even multiple procedures, and there was no guarantee his mobility would ever fully recover. Before long, 2 police officers arrived to take our statements. We told them everything, about the trap, the gunfire, and our harrowing escape. But when they pressed for details about the shooter, we came up empty-handed. We hadn't seen or heard anything other you would never know by looking at him now, but there was a time when David almost lost his leg. We've tried talking about it over the years, usually late at night with a drink in hand, but the words always seem to fail us. The questions remain unanswered, hanging heavily in the air. Who set the trap? Who fired those shots? Deep down, we knew we'd never get to the bottom of it. It became clear that speculating led nowhere. It felt pointless. Ever since that day, none of us have been able to step foot in the woods again. The once inviting trees now cast shadows too long to ignore, and sometimes late at night, I still hear Dave's screams echoing in my head. Sure, we survived, but something intangible fractured on that day, something that can't heal the way David's leg eventually did. And I know full well that he feels the same pain I do. I used to be a U.S. Marshal. Though I'm no professional writer, I've started working on my autobiography and would like to share a dramatized account of the chapter that left the deepest mark on my career. If it resonates with you in any way, simply knowing that my story holds value will be all the validation I need. It began one Sunday evening in October of 1986. I was home, sprawled across the couch, absent-mindedly watching sports highlights on TV. The sharp ring of the phone interrupted my rhythm. No one called after 10 p.m. unless it was important, so I leaned over and picked up the receiver without hesitation. On the line was my supervisory deputy, speaking curtly, "Federal Courthouse, 8 a.m. sharp, task force briefing." That's all he said before hanging up. By then, I'd served as a deputy U.S. Marshal in Eastern Washington for 4 years, long enough to understand how these things worked. No details about the operation, no hints about who we were targeting or their location. Just a time and place for the briefing, leaving me to speculate. The mention of a task force was enough to make me suspect this would be serious, a priority fugitive situation. What I couldn't predict, however, was just how bizarre and disturbing this case would become. The following morning, I arrived at the Spokane County Courthouse and found my SD waiting at the door. He motioned for me to head upstairs to a second-floor conference room. Inside were 6 men milling about, some in suits, others wearing polos and duty rigs. Most were fellow marshals from our district, but I also spotted an FBI special agent from the local field office among them. By 8 a.m., the room was packed with more personnel, some additional marshals out of Seattle, a few state troopers, and 2 detectives from Spokane PD. As coffee cups drained and introductions concluded, a murmur of anticipation overtook the room, and then hushed completely when our chief deputy marshal entered, followed closely by an assistant U.S. attorney. The chief wasted no time once he reached the speaker stand, placing his coffee down and opening his file with a purposeful focus. "All right, listen up," he began, his voice cutting through the lingering tension. "We've got ourselves a high-priority apprehension. And let me tell you now, this one isn't going to be easy." He looked down at his notes, clearing his throat before continuing. "The target is Raymond Ridgway, 42 years old, 6'2", lean build, red hair, dark brown eyes. Identifiable features include burn scars on his palms and numerous tattoos covering his hands and fingers. He's wanted for 4 counts of homicide, 2 in Idaho and 2 in Oregon, and for the murder of 2 federal officers after ambushing them last year." The mention of murdered FBI agents sent murmurs rippling through the room. The chief raised his voice slightly to quell them. "Reports indicate Ridgway is armed and dangerous, an unpredictable individual with zero hesitation when it comes to violence against law enforcement. But don't underestimate him based on rage alone. This man is highly intelligent, clever enough to be dangerously strategic even if unhinged." As if amplifying the gravity of what had just been said, the assistant U.S. attorney stepped forward, carrying a stack of folders, handing them out, as the chief continued briefing us on Ridgway's history and behavior patterns. A palpable tension settled over us as we absorbed the weight of what lay ahead. This was shaping up to be one of those cases where success wasn't guaranteed, and failure could mean someone didn't make it home. It was only later that I realized this wouldn't just be one of my most challenging assignments. It had also become one of my life's most haunting memories. Intel has pinpointed Ridgway's location to the Patan Wilderness near the Canadian border. It's a classic needle-in-a-haystack scenario, but recent developments have given investigators a more concrete lead. A tip from a hunter prompted the FBI to conduct aerial surveillance of the dense forest. Based on their analyst's assessment, Ridgway is likely hiding out on Ula Peak. Inside the tactical briefing room, the chief signaled for the lights to dim before flipping a switch on an old overhead projector. In an instant, a topographical map of the Patan Wilderness illuminated the wall behind him. He tapped a red-circled area on the map. "This is our target zone," he announced, focusing on Ula Peak. There's a flat shelf roughly a few hundred meters below the summit, easy access, plenty of cover, and prime for concealment. We suspect he's holed up in the largest of 3 caves at the location. Based on our intel, he's likely operating alone, but he's had ample time to prepare. The elevation is about 8,500 feet, with steep approaches from every angle. To make matters worse, snowfall has started, which gives us a narrow window before the area becomes completely inaccessible. The chief turned off the projector and motioned for the lights to come back on. As the room adjusted to the brightness, he gestured to a group of men in suits. "This is a joint operation," he explained. "The U.S. Marshals are leading, with FBI support for jurisdictional coordination. State troopers will handle regional backup, and Spokane PD detectives are here due to their work connecting Ridgway to a local safe house he supposedly used last month. We'll deploy heavy, equipped with full tactical gear, long guns, and a helicopter on standby for extraction or medevac if things go sideways." Pausing for effect, the chief locked eyes with the assembled team. "And let me be crystal clear. Our federal warrant is written for apprehend or neutralize. That means Ridgway comes out dead or alive, but he's not slipping through our grasp this time." The assistant U.S. attorney chimed in at that point, her tone calm but firm. "Legally, you're covered under a federal warrant issued out of the Eastern District of Washington," she confirmed. "We've got murder charges filed, ballistic evidence, witness statements, all solid probable cause. The Attorney General has approved the use of lethal force if Ridgway resists. He's been deemed a clear and present danger to public safety. So do what you have to do, but be sure it's clean." The chief nodded grimly and continued. "We'll base our operation out of Winthrop. It's the nearest town to the wilderness boundary. Air transport is too risky. We can't give away our position. We'll drive as far as we can and then converge at a trailhead. From there, it's a 10-mile hike to the base of Ula Peak. At that point, we'll split into 3 teams. Alpha will lead the direct descent to the summit. Bravo will flank east to block any potential escape routes. And Charlie will secure the perimeter and provide backup as needed." He glanced at the clock on the wall before wrapping up. "Weather is our timer here. We move at first light tomorrow. Any questions?" From near the back of the room, one of the Seattle-based marshals raised his hand. "What happened to those 2 FBI agents?" he asked solemnly. A flicker of unease crossed the chief's face as he glanced toward the assistant. "U.S. Attorney." She gave him a subtle nod before he continued. Hesitantly, 2 agents tracked Ridgway's trail to the hills outside. "Boise," the chief explained. "They reported encountering a victim alive at one of Ridgway's previous hideouts. She refused to leave with them, resisted, possibly out of fear." "Wait," interjected another marshal. "You mean she fought back because she was scared of what?" "That's what we think," replied the chief grimly. "But we don't have all the pieces yet. What we do know is that she wouldn't leave, and that led to an ambush. Both agents were killed." Silence fell over the room as everyone absorbed this grim piece of information. The weight of what they were about to undertake settled over them like a thick fog. When no one else spoke up, the chief clapped his hands once with sharp finality. "Gear up, brief your teams, and get some rest," he instructed firmly. "I expect all of you in Winthrop by dawn, locked and loaded." The following morning came early and damp, with a convoy of black SUVs and state trooper trucks cutting through the hazy pre-dawn light. The motorcade hummed along Highway 20, its blacktop slick with we parked and stepped onto the half-frozen slush, the bitter chill biting at our legs through layers of gear. Ula Park was finally in sight, a towering rock formation, streaked with snow casting jagged shadows against the heavy gray of the overcast sky. The team huddled briefly, running through the plan one last time before splitting up. Alpha Team readied their rifles and packed supplies, while Bravo and Charlie mirrored the process. Radios crackled to life as team members checked signal strength, and we began dispersing across the landscape. The icy wind stinging our skin as we braced for the long hike ahead. The first stretch of the trail was deceptively gentle, a muddy path weaving through a valley dotted with broken branches and stagnant puddles. Soon, though, it began to climb steadily, cutting switchbacks into the dense timber. Frost became more pronounced as we gained elevation, first as delicate white dusting, and then as frozen snow crunching beneath our boots. Despite the chill, sweat pooled around my temples, and thick puffs of breath escaped from each team member as the air grew thinner. The timber gave way to exposed slopes of hardy grass and loose shale, a rugged ascent beneath a sky smothered by low-hanging clouds. By midday, we had reached the base of Ula's summit, its steep face towering over us like a challenge too daunting to deny. Exhaustion gnawed at my legs, but thoughts of Ridgway kept me resolute. Scanning the long slope looming ahead, my focus was broken by one of the team calling out. He pointed toward the ground at a strange sight, a small white and brown bird, lifeless on the frost-covered earth. At first, I couldn't see why he'd drawn attention to something so mundane. But then I noticed another bird, dead, and another nearby, and another still. My stomach sank as the picture came together. There were dozens of dead animals scattered across the forest floor, birds and squirrels alike, lifeless and eerily undisturbed. The scene was bizarre. No signs of predation marked their bodies, not a scratch or bite, and aside from being motionless, they appeared unscathed. There wasn't even much decay to suggest they'd been there long. It felt like they'd just fallen from the sky all at once, snuffed out in an instant. Anxiety rippled through the team as murmurs of unease began to spread. Someone wondered aloud what might have killed them all in such a strange manner. Reaching instinctively for my radio, I pressed the transmitter button and called out. "Bravo, this is Alpha Lead," I said, standing amidst the grim carpet of bodies. "Anything weird on your end?" "Over." A beat passed before their reply crackled over the airwaves with a mix of tension and resolve. "Alpha, this is Bravo Lead," came the voice on the other end. "Same story here. Dead birds, squirrels, a couple martins too, all scattered across the east flank. No blood or visible injuries. It's like they dropped dead out of nowhere. Any sign of this on your side?" "Over." I looked down at the nearest bird, still fresh amidst the frost, and felt an unsettling weight settle in my gut. "Affirmative," I said into the radio. "Exact same situation here on the west slope. Dozens dead with no visible cause of death. Thoughts?" "Over." A longer pause this time as Bravo processed my question before answering. "Negative, Alpha, no theories. We've flagged it to Charlie, but orders from the chief are clear. Summit is priority 1. Ridgway's up there, and we're not stopping for this." A sober pause before continuing. "Are you good to push on?" "Over." I exchanged glances with my team. Their resolve faltered under the weight of what we'd just seen. The stark quiet surrounding us seemed louder than it should have been. But I knew Bravo was right. Whatever was happening here would have to wait. Our objective on Ula's Peak remained unchanged. "Roger that, Bravo," I replied firmly. "Alpha's moving forward now. Notify us if Charlie runs into anything similar." "Alpha out." Clipping the radio back to my vest, I straightened myself with forced confidence and nodded toward my team. Time for action. "Summit's still in play," I said evenly, watching nerves tighten behind their faces. Eyes sharp and weapons ready. We keep moving. With focused determination disguised as courage, we resumed our climb through patches of snow mixed with tiny, stiff animal bodies that spoke silently beneath our steps. That growing unease followed each stride like a shadow as Ula's shrouded summit loomed closer. Finally, we reached a plateau near the peak, a flat stretch described in briefings as critical territory, and took a moment to regroup behind large rocks shielding us from the relentless winds. Clouds clung like unwelcome visitors. U.S. Marshal Raymond Ridgway, lay down with your hands behind your back. My voice echoed through the cave, firm and commanding. He didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He just sat there, rocking back and forth in a slow, deliberate rhythm, his head seemingly bowed. Leaner than the images we had on file, his features were unmistakable. Matted red hair glued to the back of his skull, and shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Charlie's team leader joined the fray, barking overlapping orders that bounced against the rocky walls as the team's flashlights pinned Ridgway in place. "Get down now," he shouted, edging closer with urgency. Still, Ridgway didn't react. That steady rocking persisted, like he was deaf to everything but the noise inside his own mind. Next to me, Torres, one of our deputies, stepped forward. He let his rifle hang from its sling and moved to grab Ridgway's shoulder. Calmly, he said, "Come on." But before he could get another word out, the moment his hand touched Ridgway, Torres froze like he'd hit a live electrical line. His body seized and then collapsed violently to the dirt floor. I watched in stunned horror as his limbs jerked, boots scraping against the rocky ground, while frothy saliva bubbled at his mouth's edge. Everything seemed to stop as those of us still standing pointed our weapons at Ridgway, frozen in indecision. Then Ridgway himself spasmed wildly for a second, almost like waking from sleep in a panic, and his head snapped around to look at us. His eyes darted between our team members before settling into a calm yet unnerving stare. Echoes of shouted commands filled the chamber once more as he took in the situation. His gaze darkened with something unplaceable, a mix of knowing and contempt, and then he broke into a crooked smile. "Down!" "Hands behind your back," I snapped again. This time he complied, laying flat on the ground but keeping that maddening smirk on his face. We zip-tied his hands swiftly, dragged him upright while Charlie's medic rushed over to Torres, who lay motionless except for shallow breaths and occasional spasms. The medic suspected some kind of seizure, or worse, and quickly called for emergency evacuations. Within 20 minutes, Charlie's chopper arrived and carried Torres out first. He was strapped onto a stretcher, still unconscious but stable for transport. Ridgway followed close behind, cuffed but eerily calm, staring at nothing as we loaded him onto the bird, always with that unsettling grin etched into his expression. Clearing the cave marked the end of the operation, but none of us could shake the strangeness clinging to this raid. The dead birds scattered near our search area, Torres's collapse, and Ridgway's bizarre demeanor gnawed at us even as we hiked down the slopes toward camp. When we regrouped with the other teams for debriefing at Winter later that night, our focus zeroed in on Torres's condition. The medics placed Torres in a coma to halt his seizures, a necessary move in their eyes, and he didn't wake for an entire week. Worse yet, when he finally regained consciousness, it was as though someone had erased that entire mission from his mind. His most recent memory was driving to Bataan for the operation briefing. Everything else, gone. Ridgway was processed into custody shortly after, silent and uncooperative as expected, and moved into holding while awaiting trial. Reports logged only passing mentions of the dead birds at Ula Peak. Numerous deceased wildlife discovered near suspect's location. Investigators dismissed it as Ridgway hunting for food or otherwise scavenging. No necropsies were performed on the animals. No samples taken for analysis. That particular detail joined Torres's medical anomaly as another peculiar footnote overshadowed by the larger objective, building a murder case against Ridgway. The dead birds rotted at Ula Peak, forgotten as though they'd never mattered. And Torres, the official medical report, labeled his collapse a sudden neurological event, chalking it up to either an epileptic, seizure or stress-induced failure, a freak incident. That just happened to occur when he physically touched Ridgway. Coincidence, nothing more. There was no investigation into potential ties between Torres's episode, the cave itself, or any surrounding environmental factors. After Torres emerged from weeks of desk duty and subsequently transferred out of our unit, we lost touch with him completely. As for me, my career carried me into harsher scenarios, gunfights, treacherous encounters with fugitives determined to escape by any means necessary, but none of them held that same eerie weight that lingered over us on Ula Peak. No inexplicable deaths clustered in strange piles. No colleagues seizing uncontrollably without cause. Just another day navigating the controlled chaos of chasing fugitives. I've had nearly 40 years to process what happened, but it still gnaws at me. The dead birds, Torres's so-called medical event, and Ridgway swaying like his mind was somewhere far away, none of it adds up. To this day, it feels like nobody cared enough to uncover the truth. I've turned it over in my head more times than I can count. The rank smell in that cave, the animals that just dropped where they stood, it all felt wrong. I remind myself to let it go, to move on, but leaving it unexplained feels dangerous, like a loaded gun left carelessly on a kitchen counter. I can't accept the convenient answers people offered up. Sustenance? Coincidence? No, something was off up there, far off, and I'll never figure out what it was. That's the part that stays with me, the loose end I can't untangle. It's why that whole episode became one of the most defining moments of my career. It taught me a grim lesson. Sometimes, the same agencies tasked with safeguarding us from threats also keep us sheltered from truths we're not meant to know. My name's Cal. I've been listening to stories like these for a long time now. By trade, I'm a forestry technician at the Tongass National Forest way up in Alaska. Been here for 6 years, and believe me, there's no place quite like this one to call a job site. It's breathtaking, brutal, giving and punishing all at once. And yet, it's also the only place that has truly pushed me to the limits of fear. Becoming a forestry tech wasn't something I consciously set out to do. Growing up in northern Minnesota, the outdoors were always part of my life. My dad worked as a logger, and with the woods practically in our backyard, my childhood was filled with fishing trips and endless forest explorations by his side. He taught me how to read a tree, healthy or sick, how to feel the breeze for changes in the weather, how to know when to pick up your pace before a storm rolled in. The forest always felt like an adventure, a quiet escape from everything else. I remember thinking as a kid how amazing it would be if my full-time job consisted of wandering the woods every day. Like most dreams, though, life took me off course for a while after high school. For years I drifted between dead-end jobs that paid little and offered even less satisfaction. All they did was reinforce what I already knew. I needed work that kept me close to nature and far from cities and their smothering noise. Eventually I enrolled in a community college, scraped through an associate degree in natural resources, and landed my first seasonal job with the U.S. Forest Service back in Minnesota. Alaska wasn't even on my radar at the time. That changed when a friend from my Minnesota gig mentioned some open positions up in the Tongass National Forest, a remote and rugged wilderness, he called it. Nothing like our polite Minnesota forests. On little more than his advice and the promise of something wilder, I threw my name in the hat. When the offer came through, I packed up my truck and drove across Canada in 5 long but thrilling days until I reached Ketchikan. From there I hopped onto a float plane bound for my first post deep in the vastness of Alaska. It only took one look from above. With towering mountains and endless temperate rainforest stretched as far as the horizon would allow, and I was hooked right then and there. The Tongass is more than immense. 17 million acres of old-growth forest and craggy peaks, an area larger than some entire states in the U.S. After that first season, when they extended an offer for me to come aboard full-time, I didn't hesitate for a second, even now. After everything that's happened, the story I'm about to share, I can't say I regret coming here entirely. Life out here is pure and simple. It's just you and the trees, imposing spruces scraping the clouds, ancient hemlocks with their gnarled branches, and red cedars still standing tall after hundreds of years. My job keeps me busy monitoring timber stands for disease, marking trees for harvest, collecting soil samples, and surveying trails to ensure they're holding up against erosion or weather damage. I live in a modest cabin near the ranger station, nothing fancy but enough to call home. After a long day out in the field, clutching my clipboard or wielding my tape measure, there's something magical about sitting out on my porch with a cold beer, watching the mist slink in from the water like some living thing. There's peace out here unlike anywhere else, but no place is perfect. My biggest frustration? The unrelenting rain, the kind that soaks through even the best waterproof gear within minutes. My pack was weighed down with gear, and my boots were caked in mud from the trail. I decided to finish the day by heading to a small creek I knew, a quiet spot where I could eat a sandwich, rinse off my boots, and head back to the station before nightfall. I remember settling onto a fallen log by the water, unwrapping my food with my mind drifting elsewhere. That's when a sudden sound yanked me back to reality. My first thought was bear. Now, as much as bears can pose a threat, you learn to coexist with them out there. Most are black bears, occasionally a brown, and they typically avoid humans unless surprised. However, the sound I heard wasn't the quiet rustling of a bear moving through the underbrush. This was loud, heavy, intense. It was the sound of something enormous bulldozing its way through the woods, snapping branches, some as thick as an arm. I froze mid-bite, my sandwich hovering between my hands, and just listened. The noise came from about 50 yards upstream, hidden behind a dense cluster of spruce and ferns. I couldn't see it, but I could hear everything, each crunch, each crack. I hurriedly wrapped up my sandwich and grabbed my bear spray just in case. The plan was simple: make some noise and scare it off. So I got to my feet, raised my voice and yelled, "You didn't smell me yet, Mama Bear." Normally bears bolt at loud sounds, but this time nothing. The noise didn't stop. If anything, it seemed to grow louder, closer. That's when I knew this wasn't a bear. I've spent years in the wilderness and encountered my fair share of wildlife. Bears, moose, wolves, even a mountain lion once. This was completely different. The sound was deeper, heavier, almost deliberate, like something powerful moving upright through the undergrowth without caring who or what heard it. My heart sank into my stomach as I realized I was dealing with something unfamiliar. It wasn't the rhythmic gait of a four-legged animal. It was uneven, purposeful, like footsteps. A chill shot through me all at once. The creek murmured at my back, and I felt more than heard a vibration in the ground under my boots as the sound approached. Snap, thud, snap, thud. It lingered upstream, but was closing in fast. Maybe now 70 yards out. My voice wavered as I yelled again, louder this time. "Hey! Get the hell out of here!" Silence answered me. No growling or snorting, nothing but that relentless crashing through branches. I gripped the bear spray tightly, but my hands trembled so badly that I nearly dropped it. As the sound moved to within 30 or 40 yards of me, something sharp stung the air. A stench carried on a breeze that made me gag. It wasn't like bear musk or wet fur. It wasn't even rotten flesh, though that might have been preferable. It smelled metallic and sour, like rancid sweat mixed with something unnatural. My chest tightened as panic clawed its way up inside me. By now, I was convinced this thing wasn't following me like a predator. It didn't care about stealth or surprise, but it certainly wasn't avoiding me either. Every instinct screamed at me to leave before I saw whatever it was making those dreadful noises. So I picked up my pack, started backing away slowly down the trail, keeping an eye on where the sounds seemed to be coming from. But when the crashing drew even closer despite my movements, or maybe alongside them, I snapped. I ran. I'd like to say I kept my cool, that I assessed the situation rationally. But no. Flight kicked in hard and I tore back down that trail like a spooked deer in headlights. Heart hammering in my chest and blood roaring in my ears. I sprinted for what felt like forever, a solid half-mile, before finally slowing down to catch my breath. When I stopped and leaned over with my hands on my knees to steady myself, panting heavily, I noticed the forest had fallen silent around me. The noise, the snapping branches, the muffled thuds, it was gone. Just like that. Replaced by the familiar hum of insects and rustling leaves, as if nothing had ever happened. I made it back to the station after dark, soaked in sweat and trying desperately to convince myself I'd imagined it all, that maybe dehydration or exhaustion had gotten the best of me out there. But nothing about that encounter sat right with me. Not the sound, not its massive weight or deliberate movements, and definitely not that stomach-turning metallic stench. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every creak of the cabin had me sitting bolt upright in bed. By morning, I tried chalking it up to over I knew it. A couple of days later, I confided in Jim, one of the other techs who had been out in the Tongass far longer than I had. Jim was a grizzled veteran, someone who had seen just about everything the wilderness could throw at a person. Storms, bear attacks, lost hikers. You name it, Jim had likely experienced it firsthand. We were at the station splitting wood for the stove when I finally blurted it out. I heard something out there, Jim. Something big. Bigger than it should have been. Then I told him everything. The sound, the unsettling smell, and how it didn't react at all to my shouts. Jim listened as he worked, silent at first except for the steady rhythm of his axe against the logs. When I finished, he set down his axe and turned to face me, with a look I won't forget. It wasn't just disbelief or simple curiosity on his face. It was something deeper, almost like pity mixed with unease. It was the kind of expression you give someone when you're not sure if they've truly lost it, or if you might be losing it yourself just talking to them. "Are you sure you weren't just hearing things?" he asked after a pause. "Long days out here can mess with a man's head." I shrugged and laughed weakly, saying maybe he was right, though I knew he didn't believe me. He kept casting these side glances my way all day afterward, like he was waiting for me to crack or start spouting more stories. That's when I decided to keep my mouth shut. No sense in making people think I was losing it. I told myself the same thing, that it was probably just a trick of sound or exhaustion playing games with my head. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't convince myself otherwise. Since then, I've avoided going anywhere near that creek. These days I stick to trails closer to the station. Easier routes, less chance of something unexpected. In most ways, the job hasn't changed. The constant rain, the towering trees, and the weighty silence of the forest remain the same as always. But something feels different now. I catch myself straining to listen harder with every step, ears sharper than they've ever been, like I'm bracing for that sound again. So far, I haven't heard it. It's been completely quiet, and I pray it stays that way. I'm not sure I could handle it if I did hear it again. Still, the memory hasn't let me go. Whatever was out there is still there, I'm sure of it, moving through the woods as if it has always belonged there. Some nights when I lie awake, it haunts me, lingering in my mind like a shadow I can't shake. And even though part of me yearns to know what it was, to find answers, another part is terrified of ever finding out. That unease followed me even into a different time and place months later. Late summer in 1992, I'd convinced my girlfriend Sarah to tag along on a hike through the wilderness near Mount Rainier. We'd been dating for about a year at that point. Sarah wasn't exactly an outdoorsy person, but she agreed to come, maybe to humor me or maybe just to try something new. The plan was straightforward: a day hike, about 6 or 7 miles round trip, through a thick forest I'd come across in a guidebook. We packed light, just water, a couple of sandwiches and a map, and hit the trail early in the morning as sunlight bled into the sky. At first it was easy going, a well-worn dirt path that wove between stately trees taller than buildings. Cool morning air filled our lungs as birds sang here and there in the otherwise stillness of the forest. We didn't talk much at first. There wasn't much need for words. We just walked shoulder to shoulder in quiet companionship, matching each other's pace without thinking about it. About an hour into the hike, though, the trail started getting rougher, narrower and wilder as we went deeper into that hushed green wilderness. The trees stood denser now, their branches stretching toward one another like arms clasping overhead. At one point we came to a small creek slicing through our path. The water moved lazily over slick stones that looked like trouble for shore footing. Carefully stepping from rock to rock, I helped steady her when she wobbled halfway through. A nervous laugh bubbled out from her lips when she nearly slipped, and we shared a joke about her. City feet. That moment put me at ease. It made me glad she was starting to enjoy herself out here where life felt quieter and larger somehow. By noon we stopped to eat our sandwiches on a fallen log, resting before pressing onward, when it wasn't hanging from a branch, and it wasn't caught in the crook of 2 limbs. No, it was inside the tree, embedded, like the trunk itself had grown around it. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in confusion, but Sarah grabbed my arm with a grip so tight it stung. "What the hell is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I had no idea what we were looking at. The tree wasn't damaged in any obvious way. There was no splintered bark, no jagged seams where the deer's body met the wood. The bark looked smooth and untouched, as though the tree had simply grown to envelop the animal. But that didn't make sense. Trees don't grow that fast, and this deer, it wasn't an old carcass desiccated after decades. It was fresh. Too fresh. Its body was intact, barely beginning to decompose, with a few flies lazily circling its head. There was no stench, no blood, no gruesome injuries that screamed violence. It just was there, as if it somehow belonged to the tree itself. Sarah froze behind me, her fingers digging into my arm so hard it throbbed. "I don't like this," she said flatly, her voice cracking, but I couldn't pull away. Something pressed at my mind, a compulsion to understand what we were seeing. I ignored Sarah's terror and edged closer toward the tree, one careful step at a time, until I was right next to it, close enough that I could have reached out and touched it. The closer I got, the more wrong everything felt. My skin buzzed with unease, and my instincts screamed for me to stop, but my mind was racing to make any kind of sense of it all. Had the deer fallen from high above and landed perfectly wedged in the trunk? No, there were no cliffs near us and no shattered branches overhead. The thick tree was too solid and unbroken for that theory to hold up anyway. I crouched down, trying to figure out how the two things, this impossibility, had fused together. The bark seemed to flow seamlessly around the deer, cradling its body naturally and unnaturally at the same time. The wood even followed the contours of its form. My hand trembled as I reached out instinctively and brushed the bark near where the deer's torso rested within the trunk. It felt normal, rough and cool under my fingertips. Still, When I looked up at the lifeless animal half merged with the tree, nausea churned low in my gut. Sarah called out sharply, half pleading, half commanding me to get away from it. But I pressed on, circling cautiously to see the other side. What I found there made my stomach plummet further. The deer's hindquarters sagged limply out the opposite side of the trunk. Again, no blood, no cuts or punctures in its skin, nothing to indicate how it had ended up this way. That's when something shifted deep inside me. My curiosity soured into icy dread as my chest tightened uncomfortably, not from sickness, but some primal instinct warning me this was all very wrong. The forest around us grew unnervingly still. No bird calls broke through the silence. No wind tugged at the leaves above us. The only sounds came from Sarah's quickened breaths behind me, and my own heart hammering in my ears. I turned toward her and saw her face pale as bone, her eyes wide and darting around like she was expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the shadows between the trees. "We need to go," she said suddenly, her voice almost swallowed by fear. For once, I didn't argue. We made our way back down the trail in silence, our steps hurried and uneven, but not because we were physically rushing. It was panic driving our feet. My thoughts swirled as we walked, replaying everything we'd just witnessed. How had that deer ended up like that? Was someone responsible? Something? The deeper we went into our retreat from that place, the deeper I fell into an ocean of unanswered questions that only pulled me further under. When we reached my car, we got inside without a word and started the engine. Sarah remained pale and tight-lipped during the drive back. She didn't look at me once until we arrived at her place. When she finally turned her face toward mine, her expression was resolute but hollow. "We're not talking about this," she said quietly, her words deliberate. "Ever again." I nodded in agreement because it felt like what she needed to hear, not because I wanted to forget what we'd seen, but because I didn't want to dredge any of it back up for her sake. We never spoke of it again, not to each other nor anyone else, but after some time, I started hearing something strange. At first it was just a low hum, coming from somewhere off to my left, almost like the distant drone of a lawnmower. Insects were, of course, common in the area, but this sound was different. I stopped trying to figure out what it was, and as I stood there, the noise grew louder. It turned into a steady thrum that resonated in my chest. I glanced around at the trees, the bushes, and the empty expanse of sky, but there was nothing I could see, only that noise, growing louder and closer until it felt like it was right on top of me. That's when I saw it. A beetle shot out of the tree line, and I swear it was enormous, easily the size of a football. It flew in tight, disorienting circles above my head. I froze in my tracks, craning my neck to keep my eyes on it. Its buzzing wasn't like anything I'd heard before. It was harsher, deeper, almost mechanical, like an angry hornet stripped of all subtlety. Over the years, I'd encountered all manner of unsettling bugs while hiking. Grotesque stag beetles, screeching cicadas, and massive horseflies with bites so sharp they made you curse aloud. But this beetle was something else entirely. Its body was dark green with an eerie metallic sheen and a segmented frame that seemed almost pieced together rather than grown, disjointed yet seamless. Spindly legs twisted beneath its bulk, seemingly useless for flight given its hefty size, and yet there it was, hovering 10 feet above me. I wasn't afraid, not then anyway. I was more surprised than anything. A creature like this didn't fit into any box I knew. Still, my experience with wildlife had taught me not to panic. I'd faced far deadlier things, bears, snakes, even the occasional mountain lion. This was just a bug, right? Something a spritz of repellent or a sharp swat could handle. Shrugging off my unease, I adjusted my pack and started walking again, but it didn't leave. The noise shifted as if it were following me, the pitch lowering in intensity as I moved forward. When I glanced up again, my breath caught. The beetle had descended, hovering no more than a foot from my face now. It was close enough that I could make out every detail of its body, especially its eyes. They were impossibly large, black and glossy, gleaming like pools of ink that somehow seemed alive. And here's where it hit me. Those eyes weren't mindless or insect-like. They saw me. Not instinctively, not reactively, but knowingly. There was an intelligence behind them, as if the beetle wasn't just observing me, but studying me. A chill ran through me despite the oppressive Florida heat. My veins turned to ice. For a time, seconds, minutes, I couldn't move or even blink as the creature lingered there, its wings humming steadily between us. And then, just as suddenly as it arrived, the beetle flicked its wings and disappeared back into the trees. I stood frozen in place, heart pounding so hard it felt like my ribs might crack under the pressure. Shaky hands pushed sweaty strands of hair from my face as I tried to calm myself down. "Fear's just a bug," I whispered aloud, but even then some deep part of me knew better. Nonetheless, I forced myself to continue down the trail. The hike no longer felt peaceful. Every crunch of leaves underfoot and snap of twigs put me on edge. The buzzing didn't return, but that didn't stop me from straining my ears for any sign of it. By late afternoon, when I found a decent campsite, I decided to set up for the night, despite feeling uneasy. Maybe some food would ground me. But while I unpacked my gear and prepared a quick meal, I realized I wasn't hungry, not even a little. My thoughts kept spiraling back to that beetle, the sound of its wings slicing through the air, its unnatural size and shape, the way those eyes seemed to bore into me, hoping sleep might quiet my mind. I climbed into my hammock early. That decision turned out to be a mistake. My dreams came fast and furious, and dragged me back onto the trail under a suffocating darkness. The buzzing surrounded me, above me, behind me, and somehow within me like thoughts that weren't entirely mine but still rattled through my skull. I couldn't see the beetle at first, but its presence loomed heavy and unmistakable in that black void until its ominous eyes appeared again. Enormous this time, unblinking and endless pools pulling me deeper and deeper. Just as they began dragging me under, the drive home felt like pure chaos. 2 hours navigating winding roads with my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, half convinced I'd see that eerie beetle flying behind me, its unsettling stare locked on me. I knew it was irrational, of course, but I just couldn't shake the thought. When I finally made it home, I tossed my pack into the garage and went straight for the shower. Hot water poured over me as I tried to scrub away the grime and the weird dread clinging to me. I told myself I was just overreacting, convincing myself that maybe I was developing some kind of late-onset entomophobia, the irrational fear of insects. Sure, the beetle back there seemed huge, almost the size of a football, but logically it had to be much smaller. Yet that night, lying in bed, those bottomless black eyes stayed locked in my mind, unnervingly knowing and far too vivid for comfort. Unable to stop obsessing, so I got up, powered on my laptop, and started searching for clues. Big beetles, wilderness insects, anything that might resemble whatever I'd encountered, but no matter where I looked, nothing seemed to fit. The closest matches were oversized beetle species from South America, but none had the same unnerving eyes or presence that made my skin crawl. Days turned into weeks as I wrestled with this in silence. I couldn't bring myself to share what happened, even with my hiking buddies or my sister, who's nerdy enough to enjoy solving something like this. What if they thought I was losing it? So instead, I simply stopped hiking altogether. My gear still sits untouched in the garage, gathering dust alongside old memories of trails I once loved. These days, I've stuck to life in the city. The only bugs, roaches. The only buzzing, car horns and traffic. Strangely enough, and something I never thought I'd admit, I feel safer here, safer surrounded by concrete than out there in the wilds. Thanks for hanging out and listening. Be sure to hit that notification bell so you'll always know when new stories drop. I upload every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Plus, we have chill live streams on Sunday and Wednesday nights. Got a story you'd like to share? Email it to me at letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and your tale could be featured in a future video. For even more support, join me on Patreon or click join here on YouTube for early access and exclusive perks like bonus content. Also, don't forget to check out the Let's Read podcast, the perfect place for long compilations of all your favorite narrations, available wherever you get your podcasts. Links are in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in, friends, and remember, some secrets stay hidden where moonlight can never reach them.